I didn't expect the plaque to make him cry. Truth is, I didn't expect him to notice it at all. The boy who hadn't called in 3 years, who couldn't spare 10 minutes for his old grandpa, was suddenly standing in front of that bronze plate on Main Street, running his fingers over the words that carried my name. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe in a way he had. People think pride fades with age. It doesn't. It just goes quiet, like an ember that waits for one good gust to come alive again. That gust came the day my grandson told me I wasn't worth visiting. His exact words delivered over the phone while he rushed through lunch. "You've got your memories, Grandpa. I've got my own life." Then a click, a dial tone, silence that echoed louder than any argument. Let me tell you how we got there, how a town forgot its oldest resident, how my own bloodline stopped showing up, and how I decided to leave something behind that would outlast every missed phone call and broken promise. My name's Tom Henderson, 78 years old, lived in Millbrook, Kansas all my life, used to own the hardware store on Elm Street before it went belly up, like most small-town businesses after the big box stores moved in. I didn't mind much. By then, I'd already retired from the railway, and the shop was more hobby than income. My wife, Martha, said it kept me from rusting. She passed 5 winters ago, and ever since, it's just been me, the old house, and the creak of wind through the shutters. For the first year after she died, my daughter and her family checked in. Dinners on Sundays, birthday calls for form's sake, the kind of effort you make when grief still feels fresh. But then came the excuses. "Traffic's bad, Dad. We'll come next month. The kids are busy." My grandson Ethan used to mow my lawn when he was little. He'd collect $5 and a lemonade, then ask for stories about my time on the rails. He's 25 now, wears suits, lives in Wichita, and tells the world he's too busy building a future. Somewhere between boyhood and ambition, he misplaced his heart. The last time I saw him before everything changed was 3 summers ago. He'd stop by on his way through town, restless, checking his phone every few seconds. "Grandpa, you should sell this place," he said. "It's too big for you. You could get an apartment in the city, closer to hospitals, restaurants, people." "People?" I asked. "I've got a cemetery full of them who still listen better than most living souls." He laughed politely, the kind of laugh you give when you're halfway out the door. Before leaving, he said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but there's not much reason to come out here anymore." I didn't take it the wrong way. I took it as truth. But sometimes truth hurts worse than lies. A few months after that, I started walking every morning, more to see if I still could than for exercise. The town looked tired. Boarded shops, faded signs, a park bench so splintered it drew blood if you sat too fast. It hurt to see Millbrook falling apart. The library where I'd taught Ethan to read was closing. The roof leaked, and the town council said there wasn't money to fix it. "We applied for grants," the mayor told me, shrugging. "But you know how these things go." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of old bank papers. Back in the railway days, I'd invested a portion of every paycheck into a retirement fund. Never touched it, not even when Martha got sick. Turned out 40 years of small savings add up quietly. Nearly $400,000 collecting dust while the library crumbled. I thought about calling Ethan, telling him what I planned, maybe asking if he wanted to help. But then I remembered his last words. Not much reason to come out here anymore. So I made a decision, one he'd never see coming. For months, I met with builders and contractors, half of them kids who barely remembered the library existed. "You sure you want to sink money into this old place, Mr. Henderson?" one asked. "You'll never see a return." "I already have," I told him. "You just can't measure it in dollars." I didn't want my name plastered everywhere. Didn't want a statue or a ceremony. Just a simple plaque by the entrance, something that said the library had been restored through the generosity of a lifelong resident. That's all. The rest would speak for itself. When construction began, I'd sit across the street with my coffee and watch them work. Dust clouds rose over the roof like ghosts shaking off sleep. People started noticing. A few neighbors stopped by to ask questions. I shrugged them off politely. Let the town wonder? For once, gossip might do some good. By autumn, the library looked new again. Fresh paint, fixed roof, a reading room with sunlight that poured through spotless windows. The grand reopening drew half the town. I stood near the back, hat in hand, listening as the mayor thanked an anonymous benefactor who reminded us that community still matters. My chest felt tight, not from pride exactly, something deeper, a sense of Martha standing beside me, smiling the way she did when the world still felt kind. Ethan wasn't there, of course. He was in Wichita, posting photos of brunch and business conferences. But fate has a strange sense of timing. 6 months later, he showed up in town for work, something about a development project near Main Street, and that's when he saw it. He was walking with 2 colleagues pointing at blueprints when his gaze landed on that new bronze plaque by the library door. He stopped mid-sentence. One of his friends joked, "Hey, you related to this Henderson guy? Same last name." Ethan stepped closer, reading the inscription. "Restored in memory of Martha Henderson, by her husband, Thomas Henderson, a lifelong resident who believed books build better towns." The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was heavy enough to change a man. That's where he found me, sitting on the bench across the street, same place I always sat with my coffee. His hair was longer, his suit sharper, but his eyes looked the same as the boy who used to beg for train stories. He crossed the street slowly, like approaching a ghost. "Grandpa," he said, voice cracking. "You did this?" I looked at the plaque, then at him. "You said there wasn't much reason to come out here anymore," I said softly. "Figured I'd give you one." He stood there speechless, the kind of silence no phone call could break. I didn't know then that this moment was just the beginning, that the plaque was only the first piece of a secret bigger than either of us imagined, because the donation wasn't all I'd done, not by a long shot. And soon, Ethan would find out exactly how far his grandfather's roots reached beneath the town he thought he'd outgrown. He came back the next morning, earlier than I expected. I was out in the garden, pulling weeds around Martha's roses, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. For a moment, I thought it was the mail truck, but then I saw a black sedan I didn't recognize. Ethan stepped out, no suit this time, just jeans and a sweatshirt, like the boy I used to know. He stood at the edge of the yard, awkward, hands stuffed in his pockets. "You're up early," he said. "I'm always up early. The weeds don't pull themselves." I nodded toward the second rake leaning by the fence. "There's another one if you're feeling nostalgic." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You really donated all that money, Grandpa? Wasn't doing me much good sitting in a bank. $400,000, right?" he asked, cautious, like he wasn't sure he had the right to say the number out loud. I shrugged. "Give or take." He walked closer, gaze drifting toward the house. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because it wasn't about telling. It was about doing. The town needed a library. I needed a reason to get up in the morning. Simple math." He kicked at the dirt. "I didn't even know you had that kind of money," I smiled. "You think your grandma married me for my looks?" That earned a soft laugh, but then the quiet stretch between us, the kind that weighs more than words. "I've been a lousy grandson," he finally said. I leaned on the rake. "You've been a busy one. Happens." "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's more than that." I didn't want to come here because it reminded me of things I'd rather forget. The smell of that old store, the creak of the porch, Grandma's voice in the kitchen. It all felt like the past, and I thought the past didn't matter if I wanted to move forward. I studied him for a long moment. "And now?" He looked toward the plaque down the road. "Now I think I've been walking in circles." That hit harder than he probably realized. I turned back to my roses, pretending to check the soil. "Circles can be good if you stop long enough to see what's in the middle," I said. He helped me for an hour without saying much else. When we finished, he stood looking at the house. "It's falling apart a little, Grandpa. Roof looks rough." "I know. Let me fix it." I almost laughed. You barely know which end of a hammer to hold." "I can hire someone." I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything, Ethan. Not for the library, not for the roof. Just don't forget again. That's payment enough." But that was easier said than done, because once a man starts remembering, he doesn't stop at one memory. 2 days later, Ethan came back again, this time with a folder. We sat at the kitchen table where Martha used to set out pies on Sundays. He pushed the folder toward me. "I pulled the town records," he said. "You've been donating for years." I raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like a crime." "The Veterans Memorial, the Scholarship Fund, the new playground, all anonymous donors, All the same signature pattern on the paperwork. T. Henderson. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because the people using those things don't care who paid for them. They just care that they exist. He leaned back, studying me like I was someone he'd just met. You rebuilt half this town, Grandpa. Just kept it from crumbling faster than I did. But why? You could have retired anywhere. Florida, Arizona. This is my home, I said simply. And your grandmother used to say, if you love something, you leave it better than you found it. That includes people. Ethan stared at the old wallpaper, the kind with faded flowers Martha refused to replace. You and Grandma built everything on work and kindness, didn't you? Mostly stubbornness, I said, smiling. Kindness came later. He laughed quietly, then his voice softened. I wish I'd known her better. You did, I said. You just forgot for a while. He didn't answer, but I saw his jaw tighten, eyes glassy. When he spoke again, his voice was low. Grandpa, about the development project I'm working on. It's for a company buying property downtown. They're planning to tear down some old buildings, including the one next to the library. My stomach turned cold. The community center? He nodded. It's in the way of their new retail strip. I didn't realize until yesterday. I stared at him, feeling the weight of irony pressed down. The same grandson who thought there was nothing left worth visiting had come back to help destroy what little still stood. Do you think that's progress? I asked quietly. I thought it was, he said, until I saw your name on that plaque. He opened his laptop and showed me a blueprint. Neat lines, shiny storefronts, parking lots where our town's memories used to live. They want to modernize everything, make Millbrook relevant again. But now I don't know if I can do it. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. The world doesn't need every corner to look the same, Ethan. Sometimes relevance just means remembering who you are. He closed the laptop slowly. Would you fight it? I'd protect what matters. That's not the same thing. He nodded, lips pressed tight. Then maybe it's time I did the same. That night, after he left, I sat by the window watching the lights on Main Street. The town was quiet, too quiet, but something in the air had shifted. Maybe it was the way the library's new windows glowed like a heartbeat in the dark. Maybe it was the feeling that my grandson's story wasn't over yet. The next morning, I found an envelope on my porch. Inside was a letter in Ethan's handwriting and a check for $10,000 made out to Millbrook Preservation Fund. The note read, "For the next plaque, but this time, make it our name." I held it in my trembling hands, smiling through tears I didn't even feel start. But little did I know, his small gesture would ignite something much bigger, something that would shake the entire town before the year was over. Because when you shine a light on forgotten places, you never know what shadows might crawl out to meet it. 3 weeks later, Main Street looked busier than it had in years. Construction trucks, surveyors, business types with clipboards, all of them moving like they owned the place. I stood across from the library with my coffee, watching strangers make decisions about a town they didn't even know. Their company logos read Havenfield Developments. Sounded fancy, expensive, heartless. Ethan hadn't been around since that last letter. I figured he was caught between two worlds, his job and his conscience. I didn't blame him. Life does that to people. It tests what they say they believe. Still, every morning I checked the mailbox, hoping for another letter, or maybe just a, "Hey, Grandpa," in the handwriting I knew so well. Nothing. Then, one cold Thursday, he showed up again. But this time, he wasn't alone. He had 2 people with him, both in suits, both wearing expressions like they had walked into the wrong meeting. "Morning, Grandpa," Ethan said, forcing a smile. "Can we talk inside?" I led them into the kitchen, poured 3 cups of coffee. The taller one introduced herself as Marcy Fields, Regional Planning Director. The other, a younger man who looked barely older than Ethan, was some sort of legal consultant. Marcy spoke first. "Mr. Henderson, I understand you're concerned about the redevelopment project downtown." "Concerned?" "That's one word for it," I said. "I'd call it heartbroken." She nodded politely. "We value local input, of course, but Millbrook's downtown area has been economically stagnant for over a decade. New retail means jobs, revenue, growth." "Jobs that don't last," I interrupted. Revenue that leaves town the moment you cash your first check. You'll pave over our history and call it progress. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Grandpa, let her explain. I've heard it all before, I said, voice steady. I saw the same thing when the railway downsized. They called it modernization then, too. Marcy set her cup down, realizing this wasn't going to be a friendly talk. Mr. Henderson, we're not tearing down the entire block, only the old community center and the post office. They're beyond repair. Beyond repair? I asked. That community center hosted my wedding reception. My wife danced barefoot on that floor. You think you can replace that with a parking lot? Her silence told me everything. Ethan cleared his throat. That's why I brought them here, Grandpa. I wanted them to meet you before any final decisions. They needed to see this town through your eyes. I studied him. And what do you see through mine, Ethan? He looked away, shame flickering across his face. Something I should have seen sooner. Marcy sighed. Look, the decision isn't personal, but unless someone can match Havenfield's offer to purchase the properties, the demolition will proceed in 60 days. How much? I asked. $2.4 million for the entire parcel, she said, and that's below market rate. I laughed softly. $2.4 million to erase 50 years of memories. Sounds like a bargain. The younger consultant finally spoke. Sir, nostalgia doesn't pay property tax. Ethan shot him a warning glance, but I raised a hand. It's all right, he's not wrong, but he's also not old enough to know that money can't build what love already built. They left soon after, polite smiles and handshakes they didn't mean. Ethan lingered behind. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I wanted them to understand. You did right bringing them, I said. Now it's my turn. That night, I sat at the same kitchen table where Martha once balanced our grocery bills. I pulled out my old lockbox, the one where I kept every deed, receipt, and tax statement since the day I opened Henderson Hardware. Most folks don't realize how many properties I'd bought back in the 80s. Little slivers of town I'd collected for cheap, insurance for retirement. I never sold them, never needed to. And one of them was the community center's parking lot. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office, the papers trembling slightly in my hand. The clerk looked up my parcel number and blinked. Mr. Henderson, you own nearly 1/3 of the land Havenfield's bidding for. Then I reckon their deal just got complicated, I said. By noon, word had spread. The mayor called, voice tight. Tom, why didn't you tell us you still held those deeds? Because nobody asked. Well, the developers aren't happy. They can't move forward without your parcel. They want a meeting. Good, I said. So do I. That meeting happened the next afternoon at Town Hall. 10 people around a long oak table, half of them in suits, the other half locals trying to look important. I walked in wearing my old flannel and work boots. Nobody greeted me. That was fine. I wasn't there to be polite. Marcy started with her usual speech about revitalization and opportunity. Then she turned to me. Mr. Henderson, our company is willing to offer a generous sum for your portion of the property. Define generous, I said. $600,000. I smiled. You're paying me to help destroy my own town. That's quite a deal. Sir, with respect. No, with respect, I said, leaning forward. This isn't about sentiment. It's about legacy. You want that land, you'll have to promise me something first. The room went quiet. Even Ethan looked surprised. Promise me, I continued, you'll rebuild the community center somewhere else in town. Same name, same purpose. You'll use local contractors, not city firms. And you'll fund scholarships for our kids for the next 10 years. You do that. You can have the land for $1. The consultant laughed, but Marcy didn't. She studied me carefully, realizing I wasn't bluffing. That's an unusual request, she said. So's rebuilding a town you didn't bother to understand. Ethan spoke softly. Grandpa, that's a fair deal. After a long pause, Marcy nodded. I'll take it to corporate, but no promises. Then neither can I said, standing. And until we reach one, your bulldozers stay parked. I walked out into the sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in years. Maybe it was foolish, an old man's last stand against progress. But it felt right. 2 days later, Ethan came back, grinning for the first time in a long while. They agreed, he said, almost disbelieving. Full community rebuild, local labor, scholarships named after you and Grandma. I just stared at him, unable to speak for a moment. They really said that? He nodded. They said it's cheaper than bad press. Guess they figured your story would go viral if they bulldozed a veteran's legacy. I chuckled. Well, I'll take their money and their guilt both. Ethan hesitated, then added, They want you at the groundbreaking ceremony. Said it'd look good for PR. I gave a slow smile. Then let's give them a show. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. Because in small towns like Millbrook, every victory comes with a price. And the next time I walked into that construction site, I'd find something buried under the floorboards that would change everything we thought we knew about this town, and about my own family's history. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on a warm Saturday morning in June. The kind of morning that smells like cut grass and new beginnings. The mayor wore a fresh suit, the local news station showed up, and a photographer from Wichita Times circled like a hawk looking for emotion shots. They'd set up folding chairs, banners, and a big white tent near the old community center. The building still stood, hollowed out, with its windows boarded but its soul stubbornly intact. The banner read, Millbrook Renewal Project, honoring the past, building the future. Ethan stood beside me in a crisp shirt, looking nervous. You ready for your speech, Grandpa? I smiled. Ready to keep it short. I learned a long time ago, people stop listening after 3 minutes unless you're handing out free pie. He laughed, but there was a tightness in his smile. I could tell he was carrying more than the morning's weight. There was something he wasn't saying. The mayor spoke first, all about progress, hope, and partnerships. Then Marcy Fields from Havenfield took the stage, her voice smooth as silk. None of this would be possible without the generosity of one remarkable man, she said, motioning toward me. Mr. Thomas Henderson reminded us that progress and heritage can coexist. Applause echoed through the square. I stepped up to the microphone, took off my hat, and looked at the faces before me. Townsfolk, builders, kids I'd seen grow up. Even a few old-timers from my railway days. I'm no hero, I began. I just like seeing good things stay standing. This town gave me everything. My job, my wife, my friends. All I ever wanted was to give it something back. So if you're here for a speech, you're in the wrong place. If you're here to remember what matters, take a look around you. That's the real legacy. The crowd clapped politely, but as I stepped down from the platform, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A small sign half hidden near the construction boundary. Henderson Family Holdings, acquired by Havenfield Group. I frowned. Ethan, I whispered. What's that? He followed my gaze, then swore under his breath. They weren't supposed to post that yet. Acquired? I said, my voice low but sharp. You told me they were building around my land. They are, he said quickly, but Havenfield's lawyers insisted on consolidating the parcels under one name for zoning. It's just paperwork. Paperwork with my name on it, I muttered. The ceremony went on, but I couldn't hear a word of it. My mind was spinning. Something didn't add up. I'd signed documents agreeing to development terms, but nothing transferring ownership. Unless... That night, I pulled out my copy of the agreement and read it line by line under the kitchen lamp. There it was, buried in fine print. Upon acceptance of the revised development clause, all associated holdings shall be temporarily transferred to Havenfield Group for administrative consolidation. Temporarily, such a harmless word. But I'd lived long enough to know temporary things have a way of becoming permanent. The next morning, I drove straight to Ethan's office in Wichita. He looked startled to see me walk in. Grandpa, what are you doing here? I dropped the folder on his desk. You want to tell me why my property's under Havenfield's name? He ran a hand through his hair. It's just a technical step, I swear. It'll revert after the project's completed. You still own your rights. Rights don't mean much when someone else holds the deed. Grandpa, please, trust me on this. I leaned forward. I trusted you when you said this deal would protect the town. But if Havenfield owns the land, they can do whatever they want. You've worked with lawyers long enough to know that. He looked like a man caught between two fires. I didn't know, all right. Marcy said it was standard procedure. I'll fix it. I'm sure you will, I said, standing up. Because if you don't, I will. For the next week, I did what I'd always done when life got slippery. I started digging, literally and figuratively. The first shovel of dirt came when I visited the old community center before demolition began. I slipped inside through the back, dust motes swirling like ghosts in the sunlight. The place smelled like wood and time. The dance floor was warped, the stage sagging. But under that stage, something caught my eye. A square patch of floor that didn't match the rest. Newer boards, maybe nailed down a few years ago. Curiosity isn't kind to old men, but it's persistent. I pried the boards loose with a crowbar. Beneath them lay a small iron box, rusted but still solid. I hauled it up, coughing through the dust. Inside were yellowed papers, old photos, and a folded letter addressed to Thomas Henderson. To be opened when the town forgets. My heart stopped. It was Martha's handwriting. I sank to my knees and opened the letter carefully, the paper fragile as onion skin. Tom, if you're reading this, it means the town is changing again. Maybe too much. I hid this box when they first talked about selling the railway land because I knew one day they'd come for more. Inside are the original ownership records for the community center property. My father helped build it with donated funds before the town charter was even written. Technically, it never belonged to the council. It belonged to our family trust. I kept the papers safe because I knew you'd protect it when I no longer could. Don't let them erase what's left of us. Love, always, Martha. I stared at that letter until the words blurred through my tears. My Martha, still looking out for me all these years later. I unfolded the old deeds inside, dated 1931, stamped and notarized, legal proof that the community center had been Henderson land long before the town claimed it. The next morning, I met Ethan at the construction site. "You said Havenfield owned this place now?" I asked. "Yeah," he said cautiously. "Why?" I handed him the papers. "Then explain this." He flipped through the pages, eyes widening. "Grandma's family owned it outright? This means Havenfield doesn't have legal claim without your approval." I nodded slowly. "Which means if they start demolition, it's trespassing." He exhaled in disbelief. "You just saved the whole project from going sideways, or doomed it entirely, depending on who you ask." "Good," I said. "Maybe they'll think twice before buying pieces of people they don't understand." Ethan looked at me, a mix of pride and guilt in his face. "Grandpa, I didn't know. I swear." "I believe you," I said softly. "Now help me make this right. Not for me, for your grandma." He nodded. "You have my word." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from excitement, but from fear. Because something in my gut told me Havenfield wouldn't back down quietly, and I was right. 2 days later, a black SUV parked outside my house. Marcy stepped out, heels clicking against the gravel, holding a folder thick with papers. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp. "Mr. Henderson," she said, voice calm but cold. "We need to discuss those documents you found. They complicate things." I leaned on my cane, looking her straight in the eye. "Good. Maybe the world needs more complications before it forgets where it came from." Her smile vanished. "Be careful, Mr. Henderson. Sentiment can be expensive." "So can greed," I said. That's when I realized this wasn't just a fight over land anymore. It was a battle over memory itself, and Havenfield wasn't used to losing. That night the wind picked up hard from the west, blowing grit against the windows like whispered warnings. I didn't sleep. I sat in my old armchair with Martha's letter on my lap, rereading it by lamplight. The words burned into my mind. Don't let them erase what's left of us. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Havenfield walk all over my wife's legacy, or my town. But I also knew I couldn't fight them with anger. I'd have to fight them with proof. At dawn, I called the one person who still knew how to handle paperwork sharper than a blade, Sheriff Dan Miller. He'd been one of my former students back when I volunteered at the local school. "Tom," he said, voice heavy with sleep. "You okay?" "I will be," I said, "if you've got an hour and a cup of coffee." An hour later, we sat at the diner across from Town Hall. I laid out Martha's old deeds, yellow and brittle. Dan studied them carefully. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "These are legit. If this land was in her family's trust, Havenfield's claim doesn't mean a thing." "That's what I thought," I said. "But they'll fight it. They've got lawyers, I've got arthritis." Dan chuckled softly. You've also got a town that respects you more than anyone else alive. Don't underestimate that. He promised to verify the documents and file an injunction to halt the demolition. I went home, feeling a spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. But by sunset, that spark nearly died. Because when I pulled into my driveway, the black SUV was waiting again. Marcy stepped out, flanked by a man in a dark suit who looked like he'd been born frowning. "Mr. Henderson," she said smoothly, "we received notice from the county that you're contesting Havenfield's ownership. That's a mistake." "Seems like the only mistake was yours," I replied. "You bought something that wasn't for sale." The man beside her opened a folder and handed me a document. "You signed a transfer authorization last month, sir. Clause 14. It allows us administrative possession of any adjoining parcels for development coordination." I skimmed it. Sure enough, my own shaky signature glared back at me from the bottom. I remembered that day. Rushed meeting, small print, promises of transparency. My stomach dropped. "I never meant for that to include family land," I said. "Intentions don't hold up in court," Marcy said coolly. "Contracts do, and unless you withdraw your claim, we'll pursue damages for obstruction and defamation." Her words were calm, but the meaning was a hammer blow. They were threatening to bury me in legal fees I couldn't dream of paying. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. "Because progress doesn't wait for nostalgia." She turned to leave, heels clicking against the gravel. The man gave me a look that wasn't quite pity. "You can't win this, sir." I watched them drive off, dust swirling behind their SUV. For a long time I just stood there, feeling the weight of the years pressing on me. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Don't believe them, Grandpa." Ethan stepped out from the shadows near the porch. He'd been there the whole time, listening. His face was pale, fists clenched. "They think they can scare you because you're old, but I'm not letting them." I stared at him, stunned. "You heard all that?" He nodded. "I've been digging too. I found emails between Marcy and the company's legal team. They knew about Grandma's trust documents. They planned to bury them, literally and legally." "How'd you get those?" He smiled faintly. "Turns out being the youngest manager in the firm comes with a few passwords people forget to change." That was the first time I'd felt proud of him in years. "You could get fired for that," I said. "Then I'll get fired doing something that matters." We spent that night at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, Martha's letter, and Ethan's laptop. He pulled up email after email, proof that Havenfield executives had bribed a councilman, forged assessment reports, and planned to demolish before the permit deadline. It was enough to crush them if it went public. But going public came with risk. "They'll come after you," I said. "They'll blacklist you from every firm in the state." He looked me straight in the eye. "Maybe that's what I deserve for forgetting what you and Grandma taught me." The next morning, Ethan sent the files anonymously to the Wichita Times. By noon, the story broke. Development company accused of illegal land, grabs in small Kansas town. It spread like wildfire. Reporters flooded Millbrook, cameras flashing in front of the boarded-up community center. The mayor called an emergency meeting, and when Marcy returned to town 2 days later, her smile was gone. "This was you," she hissed when she saw me outside the diner. "It was us," I said, nodding toward Ethan. "Family business." She glared at both of us, but the fight had gone out of her. "You've cost us millions." "No," I said calmly. "We just reminded you that not everything has a price." She drove away without another word, leaving behind nothing but dust and silence. For the first time in months, Millbrook felt alive again. People stopped by to shake my hand, pat my shoulder, bring pie. The town council voted to make the community center a protected heritage site. And Ethan, my grandson who once said I wasn't worth visiting, was suddenly everywhere. He volunteered to help run the rebuild, met with locals, even stayed in my spare room for a while. Every evening we'd sit on the porch and watch the sun melt into the prairie. Sometimes we'd talk about Grandma, sometimes about life, sometimes about nothing at all. One night he said, "Grandpa, do you think she'd be proud of us?" I smiled. "She already was. That's why she left me that letter." "She knew you'd find your way back." He nodded, quiet for a while. "You know, I used to think success meant leaving places like this behind. And now? Now I think success is building something that lasts when you're gone." I looked at him, my chest tight with emotion I couldn't name. Then you're finally speaking your grandmother's language. We both laughed softly, and for a while, the silence between us was warm instead of heavy. But the story didn't end there, because a week later, when they started clearing out the basement of the old community center to rebuild the foundation, the workers found something buried under the concrete, a sealed metal tube wrapped in cloth. Inside was another letter, dated 1932, signed by Martha's father. And what it said would shake everything we thought we knew about our family and about how deep our roots in Millbrook really went. They called me down to the site at sunrise. The workers looked uneasy, like they'd uncovered bones. The foreman, a burly guy named Dennis, handed me the sealed tube wrapped in oilcloth. "You'd better be the one to open it, Mr. Henderson. It's got your family's name all over it." Ethan was beside me, still half awake, hair mussed, curiosity flickering in his eyes. We crouched by the slab of foundation, the metal tube cold and heavy in my hands. I slid the cap off slowly, my heart thudding like a hammer in my chest. Inside, folded neatly, was another letter, yellowed, delicate, tied with a faded red ribbon. The handwriting was careful, elegant. I recognized it instantly from the old photographs Martha kept in her dresser, her father, Samuel Carter, the man who'd helped build half of Millbrook when it was nothing but dust and dreams. I untied the ribbon and began to read aloud. If this letter is found, it means the world has changed again. This land was not built for profit or pride. It was built for purpose. The people of Millbrook raised these walls with their own hands when banks would lend us nothing, and the government forgot our name. We pledged that this ground would never be sold for greed, only given for the good of the town. If the day comes when those who inherit it forget that promise, remind them of who they are. My throat tightened. The rest of the letter was short but powerful. Every generation faces its own hunger. Some hunger for wealth, others for meaning. Ours was a hunger to belong. Guard this place, Thomas, and whoever follows you. When the world starts counting in dollars, count in hearts instead. I couldn't finish the words out loud. My voice broke halfway through. Ethan took the letter gently from my hands, eyes scanning the page. "He wrote this for you," he whispered, "and for me." I nodded slowly. "I think your grandmother knew it was here. That's why she hid the other letter, to make sure we'd find this one when we needed it most." Ethan folded the page carefully, reverently, like it was something holy. Around us, the workers stood silent. The sun was climbing higher now, spilling gold over the cracked concrete. The whole town seemed to hold its breath. Dennis cleared his throat. "What do you want us to do with it, Mr. Henderson?" I looked around. The empty shell of the community center, the piles of lumber, the earth scarred from years of neglect. "We rebuild," I said, "not as a store or a cafe, as a place for everyone, the way it was meant to be." Ethan smiled through tears. A center for what? For belonging. The next months were a blur of work and community. For the first time in years, Millbrook had life again. Volunteers poured in, farmers, teachers, teenagers, even people who'd moved away long ago and came back just to lend a hand. Ethan handled the finances and planning while I supervised construction from my usual bench with a cup of coffee and a stubborn will. By autumn, the new community center stood proud and bright. White siding, oak doors, and a sign above the entrance carved from the original floorboards, Carter Henderson Hall, established 1931, rebuilt by the hands of Millbrook. The grand reopening drew nearly the whole county. There was laughter, music, the smell of fresh paint and baked goods from the church ladies who hadn't missed a chance to show off. Kids ran through the hall where their grandparents had once danced. I stood near the doorway, cane in one hand, pride swelling like a tide I couldn't hold back. Ethan walked up to me, holding something behind his back. "You didn't think we'd forget, did you?" He revealed a small bronze plaque, new, polished, and glinting in the afternoon light. He knelt and screwed it beside the doorway himself. I leaned closer to read the inscription, "In honor of Thomas and Martha Henderson, who taught us that the heart of a town is the hands that build it. May we never forget where we came from." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat burned and my eyes blurred until all I could see was light. "You didn't have to do that," I whispered. Ethan smiled softly. "I wanted to. You gave this town its soul back. The least we can do is make sure no one forgets." I reached out and rested a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You did that too, boy. You found your way home." He looked out at the crowd gathered on the steps, the families, the workers, the children laughing beneath the new sign. "Home," he echoed. "Yeah, I think I finally understand what that means." As the ribbon was cut and the cheers went up, I saw it. Martha's roses planted in front of the entrance, their petals opening to the sun. Ethan had brought clippings from my garden and replanted them here. I felt something warm settle in my chest, like peace itself had come to sit beside me. When the crowd began to disperse, Ethan stood beside me quietly. "Grandpa," he said, "what do you think Grandma would say right now?" I smiled through tears I didn't bother hiding. "She'd probably tell us to quit crying and go get some pie." He laughed, the sound light and free. For the first time in years, his laughter didn't sound like a stranger's. That evening, when the sun dipped low over Millbrook, I sat on the bench outside the hall, the bronze plaque gleaming beside me. People passed by, waving, smiling. The town felt alive again, whole. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for a phone call or a visit that might never come. My grandson was here, my wife's dream was alive, and my name was carved into the place where it belonged, not out of vanity, but out of love. Ethan sat down next to me, quiet, thoughtful. "You know, Grandpa," he said softly, "you were right. Sometimes relevance isn't about moving forward. It's about remembering who we are." I nodded slowly, looking at the golden light spilling across the town I'd nearly lost. "And sometimes," I said, "it takes getting forgotten to remember what really matters." He reached out and squeezed my hand, the same way he used to when he was small. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. The wind carried the scent of roses, the sound of laughter, and the faint echo of Martha's voice, gentle, proud, eternal. And as the streetlights flickered on, I realized something simple and beautiful. I hadn't rebuilt Millbrook. It had rebuilt me. The end.